Well, here we are for part 2.
Remember back in part 1 when we woke the fire truck up from its winter sleep and filled it with water?
Now, we're going to take it on down to a cleared flat spot and show how to hook up the hoses and pump some water out of them.
Before we get started, I must say that this truck is not the ideal type to be in this situation. Ideally, you'd want a truck with higher ground clearance, mud and snow tires, and four-wheel drive. If you take this thing off the road, like out into a field, and it happens to be wet or muddy and not very level, the truck can get stuck very easily, especially if the ground is not level. But this is what I have, this is what I'm working with. Through experience, I've learned a lot of the truck's off-road limits and capabilities. And later on, we'll show a few things that have been done to make the truck a little more country and a little less city. Now, this is the main control panel on this truck, and a lot of information here. We'll just stick with the essentials.
It's important to understand that the way this truck is laid out, all these controls, it might be totally a different setup on another truck. You might be really good at working this one and be lost on another one until you practiced on it.
You can see the lights there for how full the tank is. And this is showing the truck engine status, oil pressure, water temperature, RPM. And this is the same thing for another smaller engine called a booster pump engine. And here's some of the booster pump engine's controls to start it, to stop it, to control the speed. Over here is where the little booster pump engine is located, 3-cylinder diesel. And it enables the truck to do what they call pump and roll. The truck can move and pump water at the same time. Many fire trucks do not have pump and roll. And that's because many fire trucks are located in cities or suburban areas where there's a fire hydrant handy to hook to. And typically it would be a structure fire where there would be no reason to move the truck. Pump and roll lets you pump water and move the truck at the same time. And that would be beneficial in a rural wildland setting like this, where you've got, say, a line of burning grass in a field. And along that fire line edge, you could be driving the truck slowly along with a couple of people out on the hoses putting the fire out along the line as you moved along.
Pump and roll.
The pump that actually is pumping the water is back in there. It's a Berkeley pump, and we usually run it up around 100 psi. There's a little fuel shutoff and a filter, and that's off through the winter, and so somebody has to remember to turn it back on or the engine's not going to start. Okay, so let's get this little 3-cylinder pump and roll engine started up and warmed up. Now this is great, but if the pressure there on the gauge did not bounce up like that to about 40 pounds, then the pump is not primed and it's going to get damaged, ruined really fast if there's no water coming into it. So you prime the pump, you pull that lever out there, and you can hear the sound when water finally comes through. And the pressure on the gauge will jump up from 0. You'll get some pressure going. Then you can relax. The pump is primed. The pumping pressure will max out at about 120 psi, but I'm going to keep it down low here while it warms up. This is a cool little option here. You can manually turn on the radiator cooling fan if it doesn't come on automatically. If the little Yanmar engine is overheating, you can override the controls and say just to turn the fan on. But right now, see, the temperature's not even warmed up all the way yet to 180. There's no hot light on, warning, so I'm turning that back off. It just was showing that that's an option.
Okay, next, a key question.
How to let the water out of the Firetruck. So you've got different choices. These are all in order from front to back on the Firetruck. Here's the front discharge, and it's gauged to let you know if there's pressure in the line. And here it is on the front bumper, and it's got a Y connection on it. It's got some reducers. It's 1.5 inches down to 1 inch. It's your choice. So as far as fire hose size, this is all primarily 1 inch, like this one here, and then there's some 1.5 inches.
Using larger size hoses doesn't make any sense with the limited size of the water tank and the fact that the driver might be by themselves. So this is a very lightweight hose with its nozzle, and this is so lightweight, this hose, it doesn't even have a rubber liner inside.
It's a real easy for one person to pull out, move around, and put away. So to activate one of the water outlets, you choose the one you want and you pull this lever out, and you'll see the pressure on the gauge. Also notice the blue light is on whenever the cooling fan is on. But anyway, back to the water outlets. Here's the front discharge. This is the first line that's been opened on the Firetruck since last year, so it's going to get all the rusty residue and air pockets flushed out.
It's much better to have the debris come out of this open outlet than have it try and work its way through a nozzle, which could clog or damage the nozzle.
Next is the hose reel. This is the one you want to grab first if you want to move on a fire real quick, because it's all hooked up. You can pull out as much as you want and put as much as you want back in
Quickly.
so you could move to the next spot.
Quickly. Whereas if you were using a flat hose, like on the front bumper, it's still out laying all around on the ground. You're going to have to stow it somehow, either disconnect it or drain it and fold it up and put it away, which takes time. The downside of the hose reel compared to the other flat hoses is that it's heavier and it doesn't put out as much water as an equivalent 1 inch flat hose. And that's due to much more restrictive supply plumbing.
On this particular truck anyway. Next is the cross lay hose, which is right up here.
There is one precaution. You don't want to put water pressure onto this hose while it's folded up in there. The hose would fill up with water and forcefully try and unfold, possibly springing out of there and hitting somebody. And that includes any boxed up, folded up hose that's connected. This calls for a very serious hose and hose outlet awareness. If you're not working alone, you have to be coordinating with the other people or a person. If they're on the other end of that hose and they don't know you're going to apply pressure to it, the hose could go flying off and hit somebody. Make sure everybody's on the same page before opening one of these valves and sending water pressure down the line.
Okay, so that's the cross lay hose. Now the rear discharge.
Not that kind of rear discharge, you numbskull. This kind of rear discharge.
And it's a bigger 1.5 inch line, like the cross lay. And it's got a Y hooked onto it. That's just capped off. That's not really pressure, that's just some residual water in the line. So to outfit this rear discharge with hoses, there's a bunch stored in here in the cabinet. That's just regular old garden hose. These are 1-inch NPSH threads. They are all 50 feet long, all the hoses in here. Now over here in this corner, these are 1.5 inches, 50 feet long, and they are NH threads. So 1.5 inches, 1 inch. Over on this side is just more 1.5 inches. Why so many extra hoses? Well, there could be a situation where the fire is too far away from the truck to reach it, and so you knew you were going to be parked for a while. You could hook several of these links together to reach the fire, and then you could even build off of that to branch into 2 smaller lines. So basically, it's just to have the options.
And that concludes the little tour of the water outlets on the truck.
So now I've got the engine down slow and the pressure isn't very high. Just to get familiar, off and on lever, and you can work this back and forth to get different spray patterns. It's just a bigger version of one you would use on your house garden hoses.
So now let's bring the pressure up.
See, we got 100 psi there, and the hose reel's open, so it's got 100 psi going into it. It's really important to get the feel of the water force, the nozzle adjustments, pulling hose out of the reel, moving around, and just get familiar with the way the whole thing feels and operates. Okay, checking out the fog spray adjustment. Pull some hose out away from the truck. See how that feels?
And you could have some fun, make up some scenarios that you're putting out a line of fire in a grass field.
But the main important thing is that just to get the feel of the whole operation, so it isn't a surprise to you and you're not fumbling around trying to adjust something when you really need to be quick. Okay, now it's time to shut this baby down. Lower the RPM of the engine, close that valve, and you'll see that the pressure has gone down to 0 on the main pressure gauge, but over here it's still almost at 100 in the hose reel line. So the simple solution is to just release the pressure out of it. Okay, now let's do the hose reel.
I am not talking about dancing.
Oh, too bad. I like that one. This button activates the motor on the reel and rewinds the hose in. Makes it go a lot quicker and easier than if you had to wind it up by hand. So here I'm using my foot to make the motor on the reel turn, and I'm wiping off the hose with my hands, this kind of squeegeeing off the debris. Now this part's a little tricky. You got to push with your foot and wind and get your foot off just in time. So you let it lift you up and you pull your foot off the button at just the right time. I had to do it 2 or 3 times to get the hang of it.
Remember this cabinet from part 1, we used that hose there to fill up the fire truck with water. But there's also some other goodies in here. Now these 2 are 1.5-inch nozzles with their own shutoffs. So you could use those with any 1.5-inch hose that you're working on. And here's a 1-inch shutoff with a nozzle, and there's another one in there. So that could be building a 1-inch fire hose setup. And we've seen this before several times. I'm calling it a Y. It might just be a T or a branch, but it turns one line into 2, and you can see it's 1.5 on the inlet, and then I have 1.5 to 1-inch reducers on the outlets. just like on the front bumper discharge we saw earlier. And there's some various other reducers and adapters and covers in there.
I love it because it's made in the United States and it's solid brass.
I picked most of these parts up used on eBay, and I rebuilt some of them. And there are kits to rebuild some of the shutoffs. And on the opposite side of the truck, this same cabinet's twin on the other side has a first aid kit.
This is a heads up to anybody who is thinking about maybe picking up a used Firetruck and use it similar to what this one is doing. One item to be aware of is the truck's water tanks. And you can see them on here. They are fairly modern, poly, heavy-duty tanks. Actually, there's 3 of them. There's 300 gallons in each for $900. But they did not come with this truck. This truck had really old, rusty steel tank on it. It's called a T tank because it kind of looks like a T. But take a look inside. It was rusting through to where it's pretty much useless to try and keep patching it. So likelihood, if you have an older truck with steel tanks that haven't been replaced, then you're likely going to have to replace them with something else. And it could get kind of pricey. The other 100 gallons to make up the 1,000 is here. It's a rectangular tank inside of this box.
A side benefit from changing tanks was I went from 750 gallons to 1,000 and did this without exceeding the maximum gross vehicle weight rating of the truck. This was accomplished by dumping off a lot of the excess weight I didn't need anymore. Cabinets, doors, gates, seats, and we'll talk about more of that ahead here.
I don't know if this tank installation would be approved for highway use. This is strictly for use on private property. It's not going to go out on the highway. Talking about getting rid of some of the extra weight on this truck, this area here used to have cabinets stored breathing apparatus and stuff for going inside of a house fire. But I stripped all that away, got rid of a lot of weight, and now I've just got these tools hung here. Pulaski, McLeod's, shovels, pick, more suited to a rural wildfire situation. As for getting rid of more dead weight, a big metal cabinet at the rear was removed, as well as some gates and seats up here in the middle part.
Notice that we used up 1/4 of the tank roughly doing our little demonstration with the hose reel.
Now here's another area that is a real trouble thing to deal with on a fire truck that isn't used very much, is that the batteries will go dead. You'll get a brand new battery, put it in there, then no one runs the truck for months, and when you go to start it again, the new battery you bought is ruined and you have to go get another one. So the way I dealt with keeping these batteries fully charged is pretty simple. They've been doing it a lot for RVs that are parked. Is you get a little solar panel that trickle charges them all the time. But I kind of went a little overkill. We've got like maybe 25 watts worth here for each battery. And it's much more than a trickle charge. So it has to be regulated to not overcharge the batteries. And that would be done by these charge controllers up here. There's one for each battery. And they keep the batteries at a nice float charge.